Final is the word that the avoidant consistently fails to register as final. The stage itself, the specific, interior, entirely non-dramatic quality of someone whose patience has genuinely, completely exhausted itself, does not announce itself, does not arrive with the visible markers that endings conventionally carry, does not present as the emotional confrontation or the delivered ultimatum or the clearly communicated boundary that the avoidance management system is calibrated to detect and respond to, with the distance creation that has always been the management's primary function. The final stage arrives quietly, as all genuinely significant interior completions arrive, not in the dramatic, externally legible form of something that has broken, but in the specific, settled, irreversible quality of something that has finished. The patience does not break, it completes. There is a distinction between these two things that is everything, that determines whether what has happened is a temporary depletion that can be refilled by the avoidant's occasional warmth, or a genuine completion that cannot be undone by any input the avoidance system might subsequently produce. The avoidant fails to see the final stage for the same reason they failed to see most things in the empath's interior across the connection's duration. Not because they were not perceptive, the avoidant's perceptiveness is one of their most consistent qualities, but because the monitoring system was calibrated on intimacy pressure, not on its absence. The monitoring system reads what is directed toward the avoidant. The final stage of the empath's patience is characterized precisely by the cessation of the direction. And what is not directed toward the avoidant is, for the monitoring system, largely invisible. The stages that preceded the final stage were visible, were, in fact, registered by the avoidance monitoring system with the accuracy that the system brings to every significant relational input, though registered as inputs requiring management rather than as the signals of something approaching a threshold that the management should be treating with more urgency than it was. The first stages of the empath's patience were the most legible, the warmth that was clearly present, the reaching that was clearly happening, the investment that was clearly there in the texture of every interaction, in the quality of the attention, the generosity of the response, the specific, characteristically empath quality of someone who was bringing their full perception and their full caring to the connection and continuing to bring it through the withdrawals and the inconsistencies and the moments of insufficient meeting that the avoidance pattern was producing. The monitoring system read this as intimacy pressure, as the specific, directed, avoidant-orienting quality of someone whose investment was generating the input the management was built to manage against. And the management managed, creating the distance that converted the pressure back to the manageable level, which produced the reaching that restored the pressure, which produced the management's next deployment of distance. The cycle ran. Both systems, the empath's patience and the avoidance management, were operating in the familiar, mutually sustaining rhythm of the dynamic's ordinary operation. The middle stages were less legible, but more significant. The patience that was beginning to show the specific quality of someone who is continuing to extend something that is becoming more costly to extend. Not dramatically, not in the emotional flooding way that the management is designed to handle, in the subtler, more interior quality of an investment that is no longer quite as effortless as it was. That is beginning to come from a place of diminishing resource rather than genuine abundance. The warmth that is still present and still genuine, but that is now coming from a deeper draw on the reservoir rather than from the overflow. The monitoring system read this too. Read the quality change in the warmth's texture. Read the specific, almost imperceptible shift in the empath's engagement from the generosity of abundance to the generosity of someone who is still giving from genuine caring but is no longer giving from surplus. Filed this reading. Continued the management's ordinary operation. Did not register this reading as the approach of a threshold. This is the failure. not the failure to see the final stage. By the time the final stage arrives, the seeing is irrelevant because the completion is genuine and cannot be undone by the seeing. The failure was the failure to register the middle stages as the approach of the threshold that the final stage would represent. The avoidance system was calibrated to manage the empath's patience as a stable, ongoing, essentially reliable feature of the relational landscape. The patience, across the connection's history, had survived every test the management's deployment produced, had absorbed every withdrawal with the specific, characteristically empath quality of someone who saw the fear beneath the behavior and responded to the fear rather than to the behavior, had returned through every cycle with enough of the genuine warmth intact to keep the cycle's operation from being experienced as the genuine depletion it was actually producing. The management drew the conclusion that the patience was, if not limitless, then sufficiently deep to continue operating as the background resource the dynamic required. The empath's patience was, in the management's assessment, the one element of the relational landscape that could be counted on to remain available regardless of what the management's deployment produced. This assessment was wrong. The patience was not limitless. The reservoir was not inexhaustible. The quality of genuine empath patience, which is, at its depth, the patience of someone who chooses, continuously and from genuine caring, to see the person beneath the pattern, is finite in the specific, personal. This is what this specific person has to give to this specific connection, way of all finite things. It has a depth. The depth was being drawn from across the connection's entire duration, and at some point in the quiet, unremarked, entirely private interior of the empath, the depth was reached. The final stage has a specific interior quality that is unlike any of the stages that preceded it. The preceding stages, however depleted, still had the quality of someone who is in the dynamic, still oriented, still processing, still, at some level, in the active relationship with the possibility that things might become different. Even the quiet stages, even the stages where the reaching was subtler and the warmth was costing more. There was still the specific, ambient, below-conscious quality of someone for whom the door was still a door rather than simply a wall. The final stage does not have this quality. The door has become a wall, not through the dramatic event of a decision, but through the gradual, honest, interior completion of someone who has arrived at the genuine understanding that there is no longer anything on the other side of the door that requires tending. The hoping is not suppressed, it is complete. The possibility is not dismissed. It has genuinely closed, not from bitterness or defensive self-protection, but from the honest, settled, nothing left to process reckoning of someone who has fully, finally, actually arrived at the end. The quality of this stage is peace, not the performed peace of someone who has decided to present acceptance. The genuine, interior, nothing is being suppressed peace of someone whose process is complete. The empath is not angry, is not grieving in the acute, present tense way of unfinished grief, is not hoping, is not waiting, is not organized around the connection in any of the ways that the previous stages were organized around it. Even the stages that appeared most like moving on were still, at some level, aware of the connection as a live question. The final stage has no live question. The question has been answered. The answer was found in the interior, not in any external event or any communication from the avoidant. And the answer was, this is complete. The avoidant fails to see this stage for several reasons that operate simultaneously. The first is the calibration problem already described. The monitoring system was not calibrated to detect the absence of the empath's orientation. The monitoring system reads direction. The final stage has no direction toward the avoidant. It is, by definition, the completion of the direction, the final reorientation of the empath's interior toward their own life, genuinely and without the ambient awareness of the avoidant as a significant ongoing concern. What the monitoring system cannot detect, it cannot respond to with the appropriate urgency. The second is the narrative's resistance. The self-sufficiency narrative has been accommodating the empath's patience as a stable feature of the landscape for the connection's entire duration. The narrative's accommodation produces the specific, management-sustaining belief that the feature's stability is ongoing. The narrative does not have a mechanism for recognizing that a stable feature has permanently altered. It registers changes in the feature, the quality shifts, the diminishing abundance, the subtle texture changes of the middle stages, and files them without revising the fundamental assessment of the feature's ongoing availability. The third is the most deeply structural. The avoidant has never, in their relational history, seen the final stage of an empath's patience from the inside of the dynamic while the patience was completing. The previous endings, the people who left, the connections that dissolved, were registered as losses after the fact. The final stage, when it occurred in those previous dynamics, was the thing that produced the departure or the emotional confrontation or the legible ending event that the avoidant then processed as the ending. The quiet, internal completion was not something the avoidant witnessed. They witnessed the downstream consequences of it. The completion itself happened inside the empath and produced the legible event, and the avoidant processed the legible event. This time, the completion is happening without a legible event. The empath has arrived at the final stage, and the final stage produces no ending event, no confrontation, no departure. It produces simply the quality, the genuine, settled, complete quality of someone whose patience has finished. And the quality, invisible to the monitoring system and unaccommodated by the narrative, passes unregistered. By the time the avoidant registers the final stage, the registration arrives as the specific, priority-level, interior event of sudden understanding. The moment when the monitoring system's accumulated readings from the quality-changed interactions finally produce the coherent assessment that had been available in the individual data points, but that the narrative was preventing from being assembled. The empath is done, not hurt and withdrawing, not testing, not in the temporary, reversible form of any of the previous stages, done in the specific, complete, irreversible sense of someone whose patience has genuinely, finally, all the way exhausted itself. The assessment arrives too late, not because the avoidant was slow to process, but because the monitoring system was calibrated on what the empath's interior was directing toward the avoidant, and the final stage redirected everything away from the avoidant, and redirected things are not what the monitoring system tracks. What avoidants fail to see is the approach of the final stage, while the approach is still relevant. While there is still something that the avoidant's genuine engagement, genuine accountability, genuine willingness to show up differently could meet. They see the warmth and manage against it. They see the patience and count on it. They see the caring and process it as pressure. They do not see, until too late if at all, that the warmth was finite, that the patience had a depth, that the caring was being drawn from a reservoir that the management's continuous operation was depleting with a thoroughness that the management never thought to account for. The empath's patience is extraordinary. Its depth, in the people who have it genuinely, is beyond what most other attachment styles would sustain. It is real, and it is generous, and it is one of the most significant relational gifts available. It is not, however, without limit, and the limit, the specific, interior, irreversible limit of the final stage, is the thing the avoidant always fails to see coming until it has already arrived and become, quietly, completely, without announcement or event, the wall where the door used to be.